How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com.
Hey, Carl and Richard here. As you may have heard, NDC is back offering their incredible in-person conferences around the world, and we'd like to tell you about them. NDC Copenhagen is happening August 27th through the 31st. Go to ndccopenhagen.com for more information.
NDC Porto is happening October 16th through the 20th. The early bird discount for NDC Porto ends July 21st. Go to ndcporto.com to register.
And check out the full lineup of conferences at ndcconferences.com.
Hey there. This is Jeff Fritz, the purple blazer guy from Microsoft, letting you in on a little secret about my friend Carl Franklin. You know, the guy who started .NET Rocks, the first podcast about .NET. In 2002, the guy who's been teaching Blazor on YouTube since 2020. Yeah, that Carl Franklin. Well, Carl's joined up with the folks from Code in a Castle to teach a week-long hands-on Blazor class at, are you ready? Get this, at a castle/villa in Tuscany. It's sort of a luxury vacation with Blazor learning built in. Carl's calling it the Blazor Master Class. You'll learn Blazor from the ground up, finishing the week with the ability to build and deploy Blazor applications. Since the training happens for only 4 hours in the morning over 6 days, you can bring your significant other, your partner with you, and you should, right? This part of Italy is absolutely beautiful. There's so much to see and do, and Larry and Marco from Code in a Castle are organizing daily activities both at the castle and in the area. The castle is in the Maremma, a less touristed region of Tuscany, offering both classic Tuscan hill country as well as easy access to the Etruscan Riviera with sublime local food, wine, and olive oil around every corner. Breakfast is included every day. There will be 2 communal dinners at the castle bookending the experience, and most other meals and all activities are included. And did I mention you'll learn Blazor in person from Carl Franklin? Listen, space is limited and for very good reason. This is quality training in a beautiful setting. Go to codeinacastle.com/Blazor2023. That's BLAZOR 2023 to take advantage of this amazing opportunity to join Carl in Tuscany for an unforgettable week of La Dolce Vita while advancing your programming skills in this important new technology.
Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we're starting like a 5-show recording run, aren't we?
I think we've already done part of it. We just got
in
a
the
couple
next
more
couple
to go.
days.
Yeah. Carry us down through into July. So
I really do enjoy doing these shows with you and our guests over the years. It's been an amazing ride.
Been a long time.
And I have a better know framework for us all guys.
Oh my.
Yeah, so roll the music.
Awesome. All right, man, what do you got?
Well, Seagate is still making non-SSD drives. The current technology for platter drives that they're using is HAMR.
Spinning rust?
Yeah, I know, right? HAMR stands for what, Richard?
Heat-assisted magnetic recording.
Right. So they actually heat up the platters so that you can put more bits on the metal or something.
We just come up with new tricks and ways to align rust atoms really precisely.
Pretty crazy. 32 terabytes they're coming up to.
Wow.
They're going to debut a 32 terabyte regular SATA drive.
Yeah.
And followed by a 40 terabyte SATA drive.
I don't have enough stuff.
I know, right? Isn't that nuts?
Yeah.
I'm gonna open up a competitor to
Dropbox. That's what I'm going to do. We're just going to buy like 1 million of these things.
Oh, man.
Not.
That's amazing.
Not. Anyway, I still do use some of these drives, but only 10 terabyte is as hard as I go.
A mere 10 terabytes. Yeah, I think I've got 4 12s in my Synology, but it is interesting to consider the idea that, you could triple that easily with 4 new drives. I can't imagine they'll be all that cheap, but it is amazing to see that they're still innovating in the space.
Yep, it is cool. Anyway, that's what I have for the old guys.
Great.
Who's talking to us today, Richard?
I grabbed a comment off of show 1818, which I don't think you'd be surprised to know that I went back to David Whitney's Well.
Of course.
That show we did at NDC in Oslo kicked off a lot of conversation and still does to this day. I think this would be like the 4th comment I've read from that show. So this is from Joseph Hillerup, who said, I think the basic idea is great and needed, but the actual implementation will need to be refined to work, which is how do we pay open source maintainers? One issue that comes to mind is how funny it would work when an open source library uses another open source library. I mean, who gets paid by whom and how much? So, if the funding model was based on utilization, that's an interesting problem. Like, should the one project help fund the other because they do have dependency on it. Another is the funding model would work fine for startups and the like, but it wouldn't work a lot in enterprise organizations that need contracts and possibly even vendors to be located in certain countries when paying out significant amounts of money for licenses. Yeah, I don't know that that's true. I think every organization can approach it the way they want to. It'll be more about the standards around what you're expected to do. But I don't see this as payment. I see this as donation, realistically, making contributions just to keep that thing going. If you want certainty, hire a team and run it yourself. But I do think the discussion is important. And like you said, the current model is likely unsustainable. And we're going to talk about that further, Joshua. I'm not entirely sure. Now, I don't know that I should read this last part because it has nothing to do with the show, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Okay.
Here we go. P.S. I hate to say this, but Richard is actually wrong here, possibly for the first time ever.
Oh.
VHS was technically a superior format, just beta allowed for faster speeds. So people were carrying fast speed on beta who use up the tape in half an hour versus a slower speed on the VHS that would last for hours. When you compare the same amount of tape used per second between the formats, VHS looked better.
Yeah. Well, the popularity doesn't necessarily mean it's the better format.
Well, it's also that Joshua is completely wrong, like not even close to correct. He's reversed a bunch of the facts there. The Betamax format was physically smaller than the VHS format. It was more portable.
Yeah.
The original versions of Betamax, which came out a couple of years before VHS, had more length than VHS. You're remembering the later versions of VHS when they made the tape thinner and things got longer and they slowed down the speeds. Betamax was higher resolution. It was faster to seek on. It was better in every respect except one thing. Only Sony was allowed to make them. Sony refused to allow other companies to manufacture Betamax players, and so they failed. The inferior format in essentially every respect, VHS, because it was open, multiple manufacturers made it, and so it became the most popular one, and the network effect took a hold. There were more players, so more movies were released on it, and so it dominated. But you're not going to argue technical merit of VHS over beta and be right if you think VHS was a superior technology. It wasn't. It was the winner.
Okay.
And Sony learned once again, because they continue to do this, if you don't open up a product line like that to other vendors, you're going to lose. That being said, Joshua, I think you may already have a music to code by. I'd happily send you another one because, you need 2 when you're that wrong.
Yeah.
But contact me at richard@pwop.com and we'll figure it out. Thanks so much. And if you'd like a copy of Music Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music Code By.
And, you can follow us on Twitter, but the real fun is happening over on Mastodon. I'm at Carl Franklin at techhub.social.
And I'm Rich Campbell at mastodon.social.
Send us a toot. We like them.
By the way, I just got my Blue Sky account, too, because I don't have enough social media accounts.
What's Blue Sky?
Just another one.
Really?
It's another Twitter alternative.
Okay.
As soon as I get an invite, I'll send you one. Then we can have even more. Because, you can't have enough barely functional social media accounts.
If you say so. All right. Well, before we leave the whole VHS beta thing, do you remember the format that was competing with Blu-ray? Was it HD, DV? HD DVD.
That's right.
So before I knew that Blu-ray was going to be and it was probably like the week before, I ordered an HD DVD player, right?
Right.
And it sat in the box because Blu-ray won and it was completely unusable. And so I kept it in storage and finally we're cleaning out the garage and my wife goes, "What is this? And can we sell that?" And I'm like, no, we cannot sell that. Nobody will buy it.
No, nobody wants that.
It's going in the garbage.
Not a thing. Yeah. Unfortunately. I think I had an HD DVD player. I think it was in the old Xbox actually.
Huh.
That's the only one we had. And then of course the new ones had Blu-ray. And who uses spinning media at all anymore?
Yeah, I really don't. Yeah,
it's other than those really large hard drives in your mass storage device. That's about it for spinning media of any
32 terabytes. Okay, let's bring back Shaun Walker to the program. Shaun is the original creator of Octane and before that, .NET Nuke.
Yay!
Both of those are web application frameworks that have earned the recognition of being amongst the most pioneering and widely adopted open source projects native to the Microsoft platform. He has over 30 years of professional experience in architecting and implementing enterprise software solutions for private and public organizations. And based on his significant community contributions, he's been recognized as a Microsoft MVP for over 14 years and was recognized in 2011 as a leading entrepreneur in the BIV 40 Under 40 Business Awards and is currently the chair of the project committee for the .NET Foundation. Wow.
Busy man.
Busy man.
Every time I'm on the show, I think I better reduce my bio because it sounds too long-winded, but I always forget to do that. So
I replaced it. I replaced the longer one with this one, actually.
This was the short one.
This is the short one, yeah.
Oh, boy.
I mean, how many more stories could I tell about you, Shaun? Like, we've known each other a really long time. Let's be honest. Going back to the Eclipse days. Hey, can we take like a minute and talk a bit about the .NET Foundation? Like, how are things going?
Yeah.
I've been on the foundation as a volunteer for a long time, since 2014, in fact. Lately, I've been focused on the project committee.
I'm glad.
A lot. We're coming up to another election, actually, for the board of directors. So there's going to be, I think...
I have voted.
Excellent. Yeah, I think there's 3 seats that have opened up. So there'll be 3 new members joining and 3 existing members rolling off. The current board, at least the members that I've been interacting with regularly, are very invested in trying to move the needle forward when it comes to the foundation initiatives. And also the professional services company that we're working with, Virtual Inc., is also helping us get organized better, trying to hone in on what the value proposition is better, trying to identify the benefits. So a lot of progress is being made behind the scenes that isn't exactly visible yet, but I'm excited about where it's going.
It seems to me that Microsoft has been a lot more hands-off on the .NET Foundation these days. Since the departure of the last executive director, and it's just not really been replaced. And I kind of see that as a good thing, but I don't know that everybody sees it that way.
Yeah, that was a big change. Up until last fall, the executive director had always been a Microsoft employee. And that wasn't, part of the bylaws or anything that was a requirement. It was more that Microsoft was willing to provide a resource to the foundation to fill that role. And usually that person was sort of doing 2 roles, right? They were doing work for Microsoft still and working on the foundation. But after Claire Novotny left, there was actually a professional firm that was hired to help with managing the foundation. And since then, there's been a couple of folks from that firm that have filled the role of executive director. And you're definitely right. It feels more objective, more impartial, and you're right, a little bit more arm's length from Microsoft.
Yeah. Well, I want .NET to be bigger than Microsoft. Really. That's my thinking when I think about what the potential of the foundation is. It's like, hey, look, .NET can live in a lot of places, does live in a lot of places, and it doesn't have to all be driven by Microsoft. If there's any possibility that this is going to come true, it's going to come from the foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, with any foundation, the challenge is most of the resources, if not all, are volunteer. And so it's hard to get consensus in a sort of a volunteer structure and to make significant progress. A lot of folks are putting in a lot of effort.
Yeah.
So I hope that, people will start to see the results soon.
Well, I'm glad you're involved in the project side. Any particular projects you want to call out before we move on?
One thing I guess I would like to mention is that it's been a little bit slow in terms of new projects making applications to become members of the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
That's been the case for probably the last 6 months. Prior to that, there was always a regular flow of new project applications. I think there's more than 100 projects that are part of the foundation at this point, and that includes Microsoft projects as well as community projects. But if there's any projects that are, .NET based that are looking to become members of the foundation, they should definitely consider submitting the application and going through the process.
Awesome.
I'm looking at the website, the .NET Foundation project trends, which has some nice graphs and stuff, and apparently that was written with Octane. Who knew?
Yes. Yeah.
How could such a thing have happened?
How could that have happened? Yes.
I know. Yeah, we needed a way to track which projects were the most active. And in fact, your app VNext, Poly's on that top trend list right now as well. A lot of great work going on in Poly.
Yeah, amazing stuff happening now. The .NET team got involved and really is making a new version that's going to completely blow away the old stuff and be completely backward compatible. We talked about that before. I think we're getting Joel on the show at some point, Richard.
They wanted to wait a little bit till the new bits were closer to ready before we record, but yeah, it's on the radar. I think Imo will be involved as well.
Yes. So speaking of Octane, because we were,
Yep.
Let's. You talked about it a little bit on the last show here in 2019 that you did, that you were working on this thing, but I guess now it's there. It's done.
Growed up?
It's all grown up.
So 2019.
Tell us about
early
it.
Stage. It was just getting started at that point. I think I had just released the first version as an open source project on GitHub.
Well, what is it? Let's start at the top.
Okay. So, I've kind of changed the messaging around it a little bit over time. It's one of those things where I wanted to position it as a web application framework focused on developers, and I really was trying to avoid the term CMS because there's a lot of CMSs, and I felt like there's no need for another CMS. However, the more I talk to developers, they tell me Octane is a CMS. So I'm like, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, I guess it is a duck, like in some respects. And so stop resisting it. And so now I've been referring to it as a CMS and application framework. And obviously it's built on Blazor, started with the very early previews of Blazor and has grown up since then with every successive version. And we'll be having a .NET 7 based version coming out later this month.
Excellent.
So it's a Blazor thing though, right? In particular.
It is. So it fully, so it's a headless model where it's got the full back-end API to manage, users and sites and all of the standard sort of entities you would expect in a common sort of web application. But the front end is all Blazor. So it's taking advantage of the Blazor component model, to build a very composable UI.
Which is wonderful, by the way.
I know you're a big fan of Blazor.
It's the best thing that's happened to web development since I can remember.
Yeah. I was never a big fan of JavaScript, so the fact that you can kind of put that to the background and you can really be productive in writing front-end C# UI is amazing.
Yep, agree.
Yeah. For the way you want to work, right? That's the whole thing. This will work with you. I know why you want to avoid CMS. It is an overblown term, and it's one of those great things where if it's simple enough to be easy to use and it's not powerful enough, and if it's sophisticated enough to do all the things you want, then it's too bloody complicated. But I do think you hit this point of it's a dev tool. It's a framework, but writing your own, how do I let non-devs add content code is just not smart. That's a solved problem. So to me, the CMS part of Octane is and when the user wants to add content, here's your mechanism ready to go.
Right.
So, do people draw parallels between this and .NET Nuke? Old .NET Nuke users, do they like this? Is this like their new version?
So it's a good question because early on, I wanted to make it clear that this was quite differentiated, right, from .NET Nuke, because obviously I created .NET Nuke way back in
Web Forms days.
whatever it was, 2003. So
Yeah.
20
The
years
early
ago.
aughts. Yeah.
Yeah. But the reality is, I guess, a lot of the concepts for developing components and how users would interact with the application, those are all very similar to the way that .NET Nuke worked. And even the underlying data model is very similar to the .NET Nuke data model, at least the core data model. So it's really the implementation, which is completely different, right? Like built from the ground up using all the latest technology, .NET Core, Blazor. It really has no resemblance at all to the way that .NET Nuke was built.
Yeah, but from a usability standpoint, though, it does fill a similar need.
It does, yeah. It's very similar because it has a lot of the same concepts like multi-tenancy, meaning you can have multiple sites that are hosted out of the same installation.
Yeah.
Each site has its own set of users and roles and content and things that you can manage. So a lot of that existed in .NET Nuke as well.
So you just said the magic word roles, and I know that role-based authorization has kind of fallen out of favor in the last few years, I guess. And, now it's all about claims and all this stuff. But what are you using for that mechanism on the back end?
So I am using the .NET identity service, like the library that Microsoft provides. For self-hosted auth scenarios.
Yep.
Because that was one thing that I felt was like really lacking in a lot of the templates is a self-hosted model. Like, yes, you can use things like Identity Server and third-party tools to get remote auth working, but a lot of the time in development scenarios, you just want a self-hosted auth. I'm actually really happy to see Microsoft's going to deliver something in .NET 8 in this regard.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, so it's self-host using the standard Microsoft bits there. And then it also has OpenID and OIDC or the OIDC like connections, right? So you can have remote authentication.
Yeah. So you can log in with Google and Twitter and Facebook and whatever.
Yeah. And I did that using no third-party like libraries or extensions because basically Microsoft already provided all the bits that are necessary to interface with those different remote services without using an identity server or OpenID Dict or any of these other, third-party options.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
It's interesting how many projects you've been involved in that have basically been open source projects that have then gone on to be successful. Like, and making money. Like, is Octane profitable in any way? How does it sustain itself?
Yeah. So that's sort of a good lead into the whole commercialization of open source. But so I only recently, within the last month, actually stepped away from my full-time job at Cognizant, where I was leading a professional services team, and with the intent of going fully focused on Octane, both developing out the product commercially and offering services around it commercially. But I'm only doing this because I have confidence that I can succeed based on the fact that I was able to do this with .NET Nuke as well.
Yeah, I was thinking you should have some confidence. You've got a bunch of decades of succeeding at this stuff. So, yeah. Yeah,
and I also, so I kind of and this is where I think a lot of people don't really understand some of the fundamentals of open source. And these things came up in some of the prior shows, which is why I reached out and said, there's an alternate perspective, I think, that could be shared about some of the ideas that David Whitney shared in that session and Sarah Novotny as well.
Yeah.
And they are?
Yeah, what are they?
And they are? Well, okay. So, I mean, David's whole perspective was that package managers like NuGet and GitHub could provide probably an ability for maintainers to make money off of their open source projects, right?
Right.
It's an interesting idea. Obviously, Carl latched onto that idea really quickly, thought it was a great idea.
Yeah.
But then when Sarah came on the show, she kind of explained that it doesn't really conform to the ideals of open source.
Right.
And I would say that they're both correct, but they're both incorrect at the same time. And I did a presentation in January at the last .NET Foundation Summit. And the title of the presentation was Open Source Sustainability, but really what it was focused on was commercial open source. And I think what you really have to understand about open source is that is when it comes to licensing. So if you are the copyright holder of an open source project, then you have the ability to specify whatever license you would like to provide, so that users can take advantage of your IP.
Right.
If you choose an open source license, it offers a lot of freedom and a lot of abilities for people to use it, but it also restricts your ability to make money directly off of that IP.
Wow.
However, it's completely possible for you to dual license your IP. So you can have an open source license and a commercial license.
Right.
And people can choose the license that they want. And it's the same way that when you go to buy a cell phone today or rent a car or whatever, right? You can choose to get the insurance or not get the insurance.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of people choose to get the insurance because they're worried about mitigating the risk if something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Same exact thing with open source.
And don't people actually switch halfway through? It's like, hey, start with the open source product.
Absolutely.
Get to a certain point where you either run into obstacles or it becomes critical where it's like, how are we going to protect ourselves? Hey, let's flip to the commercial license. It comes with the protection.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Identity Server as the sort of the iconic example of that. And all the heartache that they went through with their customers, about, and Microsoft too, over that.
And I think that's maybe there really shouldn't be that much resistance to it. The resistance, and I actually face this at .NET Nuke, is if you neglect the open source version in favor of the commercial version, because there's dual licensing where you offer the same exact piece of IP under two different licenses.
Right.
And then there's things like Open Core where you add extra functionality to the commercial version, which makes it clear that one version is better than the other. And then you're forcing people to make a decision. And that's where the open source community starts to get a little bit anxious.
Get growly.
Well, the reason I was so excited about David Whitney's idea is that it was an option. It wasn't like, wasn't like you're abandoning one project for another or one other thing. It's that, I've got this core set of features in this thing, and I'm now building a version that I'm going to charge for that has these features added to it. Right? It's an option. And if you don't want to buy it, you don't have to. But I think that it may not, be open source. What should I say? Yeah, I think you said it best. It's like, that's not the open sourcey way to do things, right? But be at GitHub or whatever is the perfect place to put that hook, I think, but it's still an option. I saw no downside in that idea.
Yeah, and I think that if you had even if you just took the standard dual license approach, let's say you had, let's pick a project like Image Sharp. That's a popular image library right in the .NET ecosystem. That project could have an open source license, very pure open source license, and a commercial license. And they could offer two packages of it, one under one license, one under the other. And people could choose to opt for the commercial license, and they would need a way to pay for it. And that's why I think what David was suggesting, right, is something like NuGet or GitHub could facilitate that financial transaction. However, you have to realize then the maintainer of that open source project is on the hook to provide value.
Right.
Because people aren't paying for the IP. They're paying for the service they get around the IP.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're not doing it for fun. I also think there's different classes of project. Like, clearly, Octane, while it has a developer component, has a feature set that some enterprises are going to value. I would argue that's where your differentiation comes in, is often with a paid product, you can add features that have license requirements on it from third parties or have cloud dependencies, things that would be valuable to an enterprise but cost money and so only appear in the commercial license. But I also think you have projects that are pure internal code libraries that largely aren't licensable or don't make sense in that space. And that's where maybe some of these other mechanisms would be more credible. Although that basic, and I think this was more Sarah's position, it's like, listen, if you've taken a dependency on a piece of software, chip the guy $20. Like, come on.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially if it's providing sort of critical functionality.
Yeah. Yeah. Because one day that person has to move on, work on other things, or a job calls and there is no cycles for it, and you need something, and it's not going to happen. right? You certainly weren't willing to take on or at least contribute. Like that's the whole thing. It's like it doesn't have to be money. It can also be time. Like there are a bunch of ways to do this.
Yeah. One thing that we did here at .NET Nuke when it was just a pure open source project is we would say like you could donate. There was options for people to donate to the project, and they would say, well, my company can't really donate. If you had a commercial license, then we'd buy it, because that's like a traditional sort of procurement purchasing kind of process that companies can do. Donating to things is not, it's kind of like a foreign concept for a lot of corporate entities.
Yeah. I don't know how to put that through my payment chain. Now that's more of a question of getting up to the CFO and saying, let's build a mechanism for this, which can be done. It's just that most people think the CFO, lives on clouds and is unapproachable, right? There's a palace guard there that will stab you. And so, you just follow the practices that are in place. The idea of creating new business flows is beyond most folks. That's not what they want to do. So I appreciate the idea of just by creating something that will fit into the existing payment system makes life better. It's just easy to do.
And Shaun, when maybe we should take a break now, but I have a question for you. So let's do that. Let's take a break, and we'll be right back with Shaun Walker after this very important message. And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin. That's Rich Campbell.
Hey.
And that's Shaun Walker. We're talking about Octane and open source and all that good stuff. I was looking at the website earlier this morning and looking for documentation that a developer would use. And I ended up in a repo that wasn't like an MD files or anything that I could read. It was code. And then it said something about the documentation is generated. And I wondered if that is generated for my app that I'm going to build with Octane, or if that's the Octane docs, and how do I actually figure out how to use this thing?
Yeah, so that's a good example of where open source projects often fall short in providing sort of the services around the project that some people are looking for.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to encourage people to contribute to documentation for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I've been on the Octane project. I've been hoping for the last 3 or 4 years that people could step up and provide assistance in that area, but nobody does. And it was the same with .NET Nuke. So I feel like this is just an area where, in open source, it attracts more of a developer crowd. They want to write code.
Yeah.
They want to maybe test code. They don't want to write docs. So this is another reason why I feel like I need to create in order to get serious with an open source project, you do need to provide dedicated paid resources to do some of this work. Right? I'm going to pay a tech writer to write docs ultimately. Mm-hmm. And that's just what's going to be required in order to move to the next level.
Or it's just not going to happen. I mean, that's just reality.
Yeah. Okay.
But you're right. I mean, it's a limitation. And if you look at a lot of open source projects, you're going to have a difficult time finding good docs. Yeah. Yeah.
But and to that point, it's like you often see this absurdity in the open source community. It's like, why would I pay that guy? He's just going to spend the money. It's like, no, the most likely thing he's going to do is go spend it on people that will do stuff they're not going to do.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Like invest it into their product to make it better for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This isn't buy me a cup of coffee kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is the point. Like you've always got this long list of things that need to get done. And you can only do so many of them. And there's only certain ones that you're good at too. Like, especially if it's a sole maintainer, like they have a particular skill set and it's not necessarily comprehensive. Writing documentation is a separate skill and almost incompatible in some respects. It's hard to be, effective at running a project and also be effective at that. Mm-hmm. Much less, training materials and demos and samples, like all of these different skills that come into play.
Yeah, I think that was a large topic of my presentation I did in January was if you're approaching an open source project, you should be thinking about it as if you were starting a business. Mm-hmm. Think about all the things that go into starting a business, right? If you're not prepared to follow through on those things, then maybe starting an open source project is also not a great idea.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just going to get buried.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the open source maintainer that can do all the things is just as mythical as the full stack developer, right? Like nobody's good at everything. It just doesn't work that way. So some parts of it are going to fall down unless you get some help.
Yeah. And you run into time constraints as well. Like there's just, you can't do it all yourself. You can't be
everywhere. You can't do all the things.
Yeah. And it's also interesting because even if you do start attracting a decent group of contributors, like Octane has had more than 40 contributors over time now. Some of them, just submit, a few little pull requests here and there. Others have done more significant work. But in all those cases, it's up to the maintainer to really vet all those pull requests, right? Yep. Interact with the community. It actually creates a large amount of management work for the maintainer as you increase the number of contributors, right? Because it takes a long time before a contributor gets to the point where you can trust that they're going to make all the same decisions that you would make as the maintainer.
Yeah. Well, and they almost certainly won't. Even when you do trust them, it's like, I know this person approaches this differently. Is that going to be a problem here or not?
Yeah. And there's a lot of people out there. We're having this question in the .NET Foundation right now. People are becoming members of the foundation and they're like, we would really like to contribute to the projects. How do we do that? And it's like, well, first of all, it would be great if there's a certain project you want to contribute to, start using that project, like become a user of it, understand how it works. Like, don't just show up and say, I want to write some code.
Yeah.
Like really understand the use cases that are involved here. And then you'll start to see whether there are limitations in certain areas and then submit something that's valuable. Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and getting to that point, there's also a rush when you actually make those contributions successfully. Like it won't be confusing once you've done it, like because the amount of engagement it takes to get to that point where that PR makes sense and makes contribution to the code base and so forth. That's the hill you climb to be successful.
Did you write Octane all by yourself?
A large portion of the code has been written by me. Yeah. There has been like I said, a number of other contributors as well that have contributed in some of them over time, some of them in bursts. Like one of my colleagues that I worked with on .NET Nuke, in fact, Charles Nurse, helped in making it support multiple databases. And so he did a bunch of work for a couple of months to get that to happen. So that was very appreciated. And there's been other folks who have been more consistent over time. But yeah, largely I've written a lot of code.
And these contributors are like, do they come in needing a feature and so write it themselves? Like, have you ever really looked at the shape of the contributors?
Yeah, sometimes that's the case. Sometimes, they're trying to do something quite unique and the framework won't have the specific feature they're looking for. So they'll create it themselves. Other times it'll be more that maybe I've observed that there's, a gap in some area and I'll ask if somebody's interested in filling that gap, right? Within some parameters. So, there's a few different ways that people can contribute.
So there is a retail version of Octane.
There is not yet. That is coming because I only just formed Octane Labs, just within the last month.
Now, did you have customers asking you for a retail version of it? Like,
yes.
What was the catalyst of this?
Yeah. So there were folks reaching out asking if they could have support, like a licensed version that included support and other kind of features like that, or could have assistance with implementations, right? So system integrator type help as well.
side, the tech support side, like all valid things. So and this always must have been going on for quite some time that you finally built up the point where it's like, I think there's a business here.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also I think, and Carl would understand this, Microsoft's really done a great job with Blazor, right? This journey with Blazor has been incredible.
Amazing.
Right? And they keep adding on more capabilities as time goes on. And so Octane's been able to kind of build on top of that and ride the wave, so to speak, right? And it's sort of got to a point now where there's a lot of interesting value, right, in this product. And I think it's like the optimal time kind of to, create a commercial entity around it.
I have created I create a lot of repos for Blazor Train and the .NET Show, just little projects that I show off. And sometimes I think to myself, should I put a MIT license on this, or, should I do like it officially? And I just never do. And I'm just wondering if that's a good idea. I mean, I basically show them off in YouTube videos, and I bring people to them, and I don't really get a lot of people contributing back once in a while. But
so are they essentially sort of public access then? People can leverage the ideas in the code?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm doing it for public good. I just want people to use it and modify it. If they have some modifications, send it back. And I don't really think anybody's going to say, steal it and say, hey, look at this great thing that I wrote. I don't care. I don't care about that.
Yeah. I mean, if they're an example and not intended to be a full blown product,
right,
then I think you're probably taking the right path there and providing the most value you can to developers, right? They're free to use your ideas however they see fit.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if they go to the trouble of actually turning it into a product, well, bully on them. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, go for it. I'm certainly not going to do that for a living.
Yeah.
I mean, who would do that, Shaun? who would write software, open source, and for a living? I mean, that's crazy talk.
It does feel that way sometimes. And I did, after I got done with .NET Nuke, I think I did tell myself at one point, I'm not doing that again.
So, I mean, you did your blog post just a few days ago about creating Octane Labs and dev answers and so forth.
Yep.
Have you had much response yet? Has the pitchforks come out?
No pitchforks at all, actually. And that's one thing that's been interesting. Yeah. So I don't know if it's just the general feeling around open source is starting to shift, right?
Yeah.
So, I remember the commercialization of .NET Nuke was much more tense, like there was more resistance in the community. The idea of having a company that was somehow associated with this open source project was like, it really rubbed people the wrong way. Yeah. But in this case, it's been very fluid. I think that people are maybe coming to the realization that, in order to have great software, you sometimes need to have a resource model for it, right? So that it can provide the services.
People need to make a living.
Yeah.
Right? Like, come on. And it's reasonable to do so. And arguably, like, Octane's about to get better because it's got the full attention of Shaun Walker.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also going to get, as people pay for this product, they're going to put new pressures on you as well. And that will shape the product also.
It'll make the product better. That definitely happened in DNN. So as soon as we had a commercial license, then there were certain types of companies that maybe had been toying with the idea of using it, but then they became real users, and they don't want to share their ideas about how to make the product better in a public forum.
No.
So they would like to have a private place, right, to interact with you. And so a lot of great ideas came through those channels.
Right. Yeah. And they were real ideas that could be put into the field. Like, this is no speculation. This is, not just dashing an issue. It's like, okay, we've gone this far with your product. Here's the walls we're hitting. How do we get past these?
Exactly. Yeah. Just like any commercial software product, right? They get better based on the usage and based on the feedback that you get from the community. And you don't always get the full feedback in an open source project. A lot of people are just drive by, they'll use it, they'll run into a wall, and then they won't tell you that they hit a wall.
They'll just move on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next thing. So it's interesting. The financial commitment is an interesting element of engagement.
Mm-hmm.
I've certainly run into that on the HT Box side, where giving away the software is as much a problem as a benefit because it's hard for people to value free software.
Yeah. It's the same as like with your conference activities too. A free conference versus a paid conference. You get a whole different type of attendee.
You get a 50% fall off, right? Like, so, you've gone and gotten food through sponsorship, and then half of it doesn't get eaten when things are free. Like, in some ways, I'm like, at least charge $100, enough that people will show up.
Right.
Just because of, that kind of pain. I'm with you. It's like money is also an expression of intent.
It is. It's like if you're going to have a party, and you put an Eventbrite thing out there or something like that, and you want to charge, money, don't say, $20 at the door or $10 at the door, because people will reserve a spot you'll go buy all your food and party stuff, and then nobody will show up because they didn't have any commitment and any skin in the game. Sell
$10
tickets.
is not enough.
Well, sell tickets ahead of time. Just don't say bring the money at the door.
Right.
Yeah. I learned that the hard way too.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's like, how do you get the commitment from it? The real question is how the product ultimately gets shaped and things that change. Like, I gotta think there's areas of development that you wouldn't do unless you had the commercial aspects, just because they invariably have an expense.
Right.
The old cloud proxy thing, and I'm an admirer of the Home Assistant open source project and how they transformed themselves, because it became apparent they needed a cloud proxy, and charging people $5 a month for the cloud proxy changed the whole dynamic. It brought a lot of money to the equation because it made a huge difference there. Like, it doesn't have to be a complicated thing, but it's also a thing that is not free because it can't be operated for free. And that sort of just shapes the equation. Now it's like your customer relationship changes, the opportunity space changes, the expectations change, and generally for the better if you're prepared. Like, I have every confidence in you, Shaun. We've known each other a long time. You've been down this road before, but I think a lot of maintainers looking for, I really want to do this project as a living, just don't have an idea of what's going to happen to you when you switch commercial.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and it is a matter of thinking about creating a real business around it, and and what's entailed in doing that. And I guess you're right. A lot of maintainers are just developers who have always just worked for other companies, and don't have any insight into the business aspects of that. Yeah, and I would have to say, even when I transitioned in .NET Nuke, I was pretty naive, right, to all that was involved. It was a lot.
It was also very early days. Like, open source wasn't really a thing in the Microsoft community when you guys were first headed down that path.
Yeah.
Like, that was part of the problem, I thought. And you make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't a friendly environment towards open source at all.
No.
Definitely from Microsoft, although there were certain pockets, right? Like, there was always the folks like Scott Guthrie and that team that was very pro open source, right? And so they're the ones who sponsored .NET Nuke, right, in the early days.
Yeah, sure.
Hanselman and Hack and Connery and the Ninja Army.
Yeah, and they transformed the company kind of from the inside out, right? Some ways.
Someday I might actually finish the book that explains a lot of that stuff. It's a very interesting set of forces. Like,
Richard, do I have to come there and babysit you to write this book? Do I need to bring some whiskey?
I think I need Ritalin, actually. But there's this great moment, and I've never fully written this part out, where leadership has figured out that it's essential. And there's folks down in the trenches that have figured out that it's essential, but the folks in the middle still haven't gotten it yet. And there's this sort of pressure of, how do you push in? Like, you don't want to dictate from on high. You want it to come from grassroots, but then we're resisting all that time. Like, there's just this fascinating moment where it's like, 2/3 of you guys are on the same side. You just don't know.
Interesting. But that seemed to happen when Satya kind of came in, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it was coincidental that it happened at that time, but that seemed to be, there was a big shift that happened.
Yeah. Well, definitely then the leadership was in that space. And one would argue that Ballmer realized that he was an obstacle to the new company, and so needed to move on too. But this really comes down to the shift to the cloud, because the shift to the cloud means I just want workloads. And if some of them are open source, whatever, right? We're not a Windows company anymore. We're a cloud company. And so, and you look at it now, like 40% of their workloads are Linux. Because who cares? They make their own flavor of Linux, for crying out loud. There's like half a dozen different flavors of Linux you can download from the Windows Store. The Windows Store.
Yeah.
What a different time it is from when we started.
I was actually talking to my brother yesterday and he worked with me in DNN Corp, and we got a lot of partnership value from Microsoft in like the 2009 through 2012 era, because they were still fixated on competing with Linux and PHP and WordPress, all of those.
Yes.
And they wanted to showcase that there were options available on Windows, like native options, right? And .NET Nuke was one of those options. And so we got a lot of marketing visibility as a result of that.
Yeah,
right.
But yeah, that is not the world we're in anymore.
No, not at all.
Right. Now it's embrace everyone, which is great.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Well,
I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
And also try and interoperate too. Like that's all part of it is like, can we all work and play well with each other? Like in some ways the operating system just kind of become irrelevant. I don't care. Just can you consume my JSON feed or not? You know, that's what actually matters.
I had the surreal experience of having this conversation with my wife, which culminated in her admitting she didn't know what the operating system was, you know? And I think most users don't know Windows. What's Windows?
It's really it's a good day, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Like, cause it is irrelevant.
Well, what's Windows? Windows, you know, the operating system. What's that? I mean, is that my tabs? Or is it the things on my desktop? Is that Windows? Yeah. You know, it's hard. It's hard to know.
Yeah. You know, that desktop, Windows.
If you weren't around, you know, and you didn't understand what
not a part of
the
it.
technical terms.
So the hardcore Mac users know that it's not Windows.
Yeah, that's true. I love telling this story when I was younger, cause I was a PC guy and this Mac guy came up to me. He was learning programming stuff. What are these things called? Files? What's a file? You didn't know because, you know, his environment was draggy droppy and documents and whatever.
Well, that's now the norm. Most people don't know where their stuff's stored anymore because it just gets stored and they can find it when they need it.
Yeah.
The idea that it lives on a Google Drive or a OneDrive or any of those things. Doesn't matter.
Who makes good hard disk hierarchies anymore, right?
Yeah, nobody. It's not a thing.
Yeah.
Even when I add
lucky, you
folders to
tagged.
Google Drive or something like that, I don't make folders and subfolders and stuff. I just make documents because you can just find them by searching.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
On the topic of books, so you've been working on a book a long time, Richard.
Yeah.
But have you noticed that there seems to be a lot more technical books coming out again? Like it felt like I thought books were going away, but
Yeah.
I keep seeing more and more announcements on like things like LinkedIn about people writing books.
I think the publication costs have dropped enough now that the minimum number of sales for it to be worthwhile for the publisher is small.
Well, when you say
Okay.
publisher, are most people self-publishing now?
Some folks are, but the drive you're seeing right now, it's like I get a lot of messages from different publishers that now have new engines and are keen to find authors and things like that. I mean, I most likely will self-publish the history of .NET.
Yeah.
I hadn't really decided. I think it's become pretty clear that most people just want the audiobook anyway.
I want the coffee table book with the glossy photos and everything.
Oh, totally. The reaction to nobody's going to read the physical book. What they want is the spine in their video shot behind them, right? That it says, history down there. That's what
The
they want.
library.
That's
yeah.
it. And then it may be on their Kindle and it might be, in their, and on their phone.
Yeah.
And that's really what's going to happen. And that, and the director's commentary where I'll tell all the ridiculous stories of trying to assemble this stupid thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well,
It's a big bite.
where are we going next here, Shaun? What's next for you?
So this release for .NET 7 obviously coming up this month, but then moving towards, of course, .NET 8. There's a lot of changes coming with Blazor. A lot of interesting possibilities with this new server-side rendering model.
Right.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around that because there's some things that we did in Octane which are, pushing the envelope a little. Like, for example, we don't use the default Blazor router.
Yeah.
We have our own custom router.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, certain dependencies that have kind of emerged over time that are dependent on the default routers. So we have to figure out how to reconcile those differences to unleash this new functionality.
Yeah.
So
How have you found the process of updating Blazor projects, or any project for that matter, from one version of .NET to the next? And I don't mean .NET Windows framework, .NET Core, from say .NET Core 3 to 5 to 6 to 7. How many of those have you done, and have you found them as easy as everybody says they are?
yeah, so I've done all the full sort of, version upgrades, and it's been seamless, to be honest. Like, and that's pretty amazing considering that Octane is a pretty large code base at this point. But like, for example, moving from 6 to 7 was like just changing the references. There was not a single breaking change.
Wow.
And there was And I think even from 5 to 6, it was like very minimal.
Minimal, yeah.
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 So Microsoft's done a very good job at that. And in fact, it's interesting because when I talk to other folks that are in other ecosystems like Angular, especially Angular, they seem to be really frustrated at the breaking changes that happen constantly in every release, right? So this is a real advantage, I think, for Blazor.
Certainly Angular 1 to 2 was the most painful, I think, wasn't it?
I think lately it's been super painful, even with recent versions.
Jeez.
What are they out at 16? Like this should be smoother than that by now. And I would argue that Blazor being such a young product, it would be more likely to twitch more.
Agreed.
But I think you're also dealing with a very experienced team that does know how to smooth a lot of this.
Yes. I was going to say that, when Steve Sanderson had that first demo, you look at the first demo, not a whole lot has changed in the component model since that very first demo he did at NDC. Granted, it was pretty simple, and things have been added to it, but it still kind of looks the same.
And the underlying code base has been completely changed, but they have not moved away from the core metaphors. Yeah. I don't know that Blazor United is even on your radar yet, Shaun, because it's not really a thing.
Yeah, no, that's what I was talking to about the server side and .NET. Yeah, because I think they're moving away from that United name.
Yeah.
It's like a United concept now.
It's just going to be Blazor.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm excited about that because like in an application like Octane, there are certainly pages where there is just content that could be rendered and not necessarily anything that's interactive. Mm. And that's a perfect candidate for server-side rendering.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's a good fit.
Yeah, why push that stuff to the client? You'll get good results without doing that. So just the ability for you as the manager of that CMS to go through and say, that can be server, that's best client, and so on. It doesn't really matter.
Should produce better performance of the application in general because it doesn't have to render things twice.
Yeah.
Right? So, and it should be interesting.
Yeah, it's a good ride. And
do you think people have finally gotten past the idea that this is the next Silverlight?
Yeah, God, thank God for that.
Fun?
You still, every once in a while, I still get some pushback on that, and I have to explain it all over again. Yeah.
People are still angry. It's remarkable for as long ago as it was. But that's because Microsoft has a history of always building paths for developers going forward. And Silverlight is this glaring hole of, except there where you did nothing. You basically abandoned us.
We're 5 or 6 years into this now. So it's pretty clear that there's like a roadmap.
Yes.
And of course, the difference between the plugin model and WebAssembly is remarkable. And, the thing is that maybe the real thing about Silverlight what would have prevented that was making it in the first place, because at the time the plugin model was the only way to do it in the browser, and it wasn't secure and it wasn't safe. And should they have known that, that I don't know.
Yeah, they were competing against Flash, right? Like that was what they were concerned about,
right?
And it got transformed into something more,
right?
But that's in 2010 in April, it was the way to build enterprise app. And by November, it was nowhere.
Gaboom.
It basically disappeared. But not even announced. Just, there were no sessions at PDC. Like, that was the thing. But that's also when they were freaking out about what would become Win 8. So they were all pretty locked down.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very bizarre time. I don't expect it to be repeated.
No, I don't see that happening again.
But I mean, look at the differences in Blazor too.
Yeah.
Open source, right?
Yeah.
Like, Microsoft could walk away from it, but the code ain't going to disappear.
And everybody embraces WebAssembly. Everybody, even Safari.
Yeah, even finally. But yes, and all of that is true. I still think a lot of the folks that are coming out of web forms are enamored of Blazor because it's the all C# experience.
Yeah. It's surprising how many web forms applications are still out there.
Yep.
And
millions
don't have, I don't think, really a good path forward.
No.
So,
I just wonder how many of them are no longer buildable, right? Like the companies depend on them, but the code base they don't have a working dev environment for it.
We did a new version of an app that was a web forms app for a customer. And when, I said, so what's your timeline? He's like, well, I'm not so sure this is going to make it through the winter. Like, it's running with duct tape and baling wire, crashes often, and we may not see it towards the end of the couple months.
Yeah. There's a couple of sysadmins that have written a whole bunch of scripts to keep rebooting things and restarting stuff and repairing stuff and so forth. And they're all tired.
Yep, I know. Yeah, I feel sorry for the people that had to deal with that stuff back then. Now it's a cakewalk compared to that.
I still keep running across .NET Nuke sites out in the wild. In fact, like my local municipality where I live, they have a .NET Nuke site running their public utilities site still.
And probably a vintage site, like a 4. Like, yeah.
Yeah, so.
Well, and this is the thing is you find these little nooks and crannies of unmaintained software that the company has a dependency on. They're, way out of date on versions. Probably don't have a working dev environment more that they couldn't build it if they even wanted to, much less that you'd have any chance of doing that.
Do you have a upgrade path for .NET Nuke users to get their content running in Octane?
Not a automated one, but I believe there could definitely be one created because, like I said, the data models are very similar. So the data would move across, but the apps, like if you have custom modules that you wrote for, of course, web forms, they would have to be rewritten in Blazor components.
No easy way to do that.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations, man. I mean, I'm hoping you'll be back to talk about how the commercialization side's going on and the landmines you haven't seen yet.
Yep, I'd be happy to be back. It's always great to talk to you folks.
You too, Shaun. Take care, and thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on .NET Rocks.
.NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got a transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a toy boy. Life is hard.